Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Monday, January 31st. It's a new week. That means some new opportunities, some new charts to take a look at, and some new headlines to cover. Very excited about that. Before we start, CJ, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well. Excited to dive into some of the recent price action. Like you said before we started, Monty, traditional stock markets, indices kind of struggling to make up their mind whether they're going to rally here or not. Bitcoin hanging in there a little bit, kind of brushing off the 38K level. Got some resistance up at 38.6. We're going to discuss that and more. A lot of bids and offers in the order book. So excited to get into that and much more. How you doing, Monty?
Doing well, CJ, doing well. And, it's always kind of weird on those weekends when we have a weekend that was preceded by some heavy sell pressure during the trading week. So it's kind of hard to interpret this weekend's price action. Low volume, lots of indecision, it seems like, in this market. And I think this week could be a potentially interesting week. And, we're setting up here with some nice price action in traditional equities. NASDAQ looking like it kind of wants to bounce here. And one thing that you pointed out, CJ, that I think is worth starting today's episode with is the DXY. That thing had been absolutely on fire. Looking like it's trying to pull back here a little bit. You want to start with that chart and then, dive into some more, TA?
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's go to the DXY. So first, starting off with the daily chart here, I want to point out some, actually, let's look at it from a more macro time frame. So this is a weekly chart on the DXY. And as you can see, ever since we formed this W bottom here, kind of during like March and April of 21, just rally all the way ever since. That's what we've seen. It's been very difficult for Bitcoin to rally over that time as well. So something that's been quite interesting historically is if you look all across the 2017, 2018 bull market with Bitcoin, you have a declining DXY. Meanwhile, throughout the 2018 to 2020 bear market, you have a increasing DXY. And so ultimately, we can find this inverse correlation between the DXY and Bitcoin. Of course, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's quite interesting how it remains in the macro trend there. Over the course of the 2020 bull market, DXY declines, Bitcoin goes absolutely parabolic. Now we see the exact opposite, where Bitcoin's been declining very heavily over the past few months, and the DXY has been trending positive. So very interesting to kind of note there. As you can see, it's kind of a tentative cup and handle pattern forming, but looking at a more micro time frame, we are starting to come off. We are starting to test a local level of supply being left over from the 2019 resistance level. So we'll see how that plays out. But overall, we are starting to turn down and see a little bit of negative price action in the DXY. So somewhat noteworthy there. But Monty, anything you'd like to add before we move on to, say, some other charts, data metrics? Anything you'd like to share, my friend?
Yeah, well, I wanted to hit one headline. First of all, thanks for that analysis of the DXY. That has been, I think, one of the most defining relationships in this space over the last 3 or 4 months here has been that inverse relationship between Bitcoin and the DXY. But one thing, CJ, that you shared in chat this morning, and I think is a good headline to start off today's show with, is an aspect regarding Bitcoin's derivatives market. And although this weekend, we saw relatively low volume in the spot market, it seems like the Bitcoin derivatives market is really heating up. And this headline, it's funny because you posted in chat and it was being interpreted in a few different ways by some of our members. And that's kind of the nature of these sort of headlines, is that some people see it as bullish, some people see it as bearish. But one thing that's undeniable is that the data from Skew tells us that there is a high demand for puts right now in Bitcoin. And as we can see, the put call ratio is reaching a level that we haven't seen since back in August. So definitely worth noting there. And also, one thing that is noteworthy as well is, we peaked back here in August, and ultimately, when we had this high amount of puts in the space, that's what we were talking about when, there was a catalyst to propel us out of this, consolidating bear market here. That is when we had that short squeeze. So one thing that, we typically associate with a high put call ratio is the possibility for a short squeeze. So we'll see if that is in the cards here. But one thing that is also worth noting is that, we're seeing a similar sentiment in traditional equities as well. This is a headline from on Friday from Financial Times, and the demand for put options is actually surpassed the early weeks of the pandemic in terms of the demand for puts and the put call ratio. So, lots of bearish sentiment in the market still remaining here this week. But ultimately, I think that that's kind of what we need. We need people to get incredibly bearish. We need capitulation to occur. And, that was the catalyst that propelled us out of this bear market here, allowed us to make new highs. Will we have a similar catalyst here? I think the derivatives market is definitely worth keeping an eye on as we continue to see a record amount of volume, and also a very, very interesting, put to call ratio here as we, approach these critical levels. So just wanted to get that on your radar. But any thoughts on that derivatives data there, CJ?
Yeah, I mean, it's showing the trend, and the trend is pain. Doesn't mean it has to reverse automatically, but it is definitely interesting to take worthy of when sentiment is obscurely shifted in one direction or another. And I mean, like you said, this is the most bearish people have been since COVID lows. So very interesting and noteworthy there. Also, if you're interested in learning how to see like Monty and I's trade insights, as well as a community of traders as well, you can check out the link in the description below. We always appreciate that. But with that being said, why don't we get into some more data? Because you had mentioned the potential of a short squeeze. A lot of things have to come together, especially just namely a whale wanting to buy a large amount of Bitcoin. But if we were to compare this historically to other times of notable short squeezes, when price gets the funding, in other words, like leverage funding on exchanges, when shorts began to pay a premium to open short positions in relation to longs, that's when the funding gets skewed very much negative to the downside. And that shows that sentiment, there are more shorts in the market than longs. And so therefore we could be vulnerable for one type of short squeeze to the upside. Those conditions are present. Doesn't mean we have to, but they are there. Also, we should take note that look at how funding was skewed to the upside all throughout this uptrend. So we could definitely continue to go lower, despite the fact that this funding is already skewed to the bearish side. Being said, when we tip negative like this, throughout the macro trend, we usually don't stay down there for very long. That's just kind of been what the price action has done historically. Another thing I wanted to share in terms of just resistance levels that we're actually reaching right now is this 37,800 level. And so ever since last night, I mean, we had a lot of offers really stacked up at this level, now approaching even more concentrated in terms of like offers putting above price. A lot of times people say, oh, this is just a spoof to scare the market. In many cases, it could be in crypto, but I mean, this is not an example of that. A lot of times when you flash large bids or you're trading size, you do that as a technique to facilitate you actually being filled. It's kind of like showing your hand or whatnot. But anyways, seeing some resistance, it'll be interesting to see if we're able to get through that level, or this is the local top for today here on this little, 15 or 5 minute charts. Regardless, I'll pass it back to you, Monty.
Thank you, CJ. Always good to take a look at that order book data to kind of get a feel for what we may see today if we hit some of those critical levels. One last piece of news I wanted to wrap up today's show with, because it involves an asset that a lot of people in our community are involved with. We've been trading in and out of this asset a lot over the last couple of weeks, and that is Luna. And this goes back to some of the headlines we were covering last week with the whole Wonderland debacle, and what happened with Quadriga and how like that is bleeding over into current projects today. So this has been, there's been big fallout from this news. Most notably, Wonderland is closing up shop. They did a vote over the weekend, and the consensus was to end the project. So they will not be going forward. Daniel said Wonderland experiment is coming to an end. It's clear from the vote the community is divided. The core and heart of Wonderland is still the community. If we cannot find agreement on whether or not we should continue, that means we failed. And this has not just affected Wonderland. This is bleeding into other protocols. CJ, you talked a lot about how how this affects Luna, given the fact that it is heavily involved with the Luna stablecoin UST, and we have seen some very, very negative price action in terms of Luna. It's actually over the weekend, we saw some very heavy sell pressure hitting this thing. Seems like it's bouncing back a little bit now, but still, when does this fallout end from this Wonderland debacle? Has Luna reached bottoms, and is it looking to bounce? Tough to say. Any thoughts on this news and the current price action of Luna here, CJ?
Yeah, I mean, you have to take into account how much people are up on their Luna investments, because once you see those like initial failures, I hesitate to even call them failures, because people will likely come back to the Luna ecosystem and like be praising it in bullish market conditions. But let's take a look at Luna, because we are actually going into like a local area of demand here. So like I definitely would not want to be shorting off this level. I think we actually will get a nice, reasonable reaction level, reaction rally off these lows, especially as the RSI starts to begin to turn up. But overall, like in the grand scheme of things, if we are to create another lower high at like 60 or roughly $70 and then continue trending lower, the Luna chart, like if you just zoomed out for a long time, like it was absolutely insane how much this thing has grown, from 30 or 40 cents to over $100 in just 1 year. So the project could still go to like, $30, $25, come back and make new all-time highs and go to 200 or 400. Personally, I think that's probably what's going to happen in the broader macro trend of Luna. But one thing that you guys can watch for, like you can see that it's kind of a quasi head and shoulders pattern, but when you have a kind of upward sloping trend like that, and then you put in a lower high, and then the lower high breaks that ascending trend line, boom, that's your trigger to go short, and you can ride it down to that local line of demand. So that could have been a potential short setup. Obviously hindsight is 2020, but when you have a lower high that then breaks kind of that like a trend line like that, that's an interesting short trigger, or long trigger, of course, if you're looking at like the inverted aspect of that setup. But I saw some funny tweets on Twitter. People were like, "Oh my God, you animals, what have you done to Luna?" And it was a rough one.
Yeah, it is a rough one. And last night I was chatting with some members of our community, and they're speculating about how it is at a good price point to dollar cost average. But I think you make a good point there, CJ. If you zoom out, I mean, this thing has been an absolute speculative monster in the last year, making incredible gains. And when we have this sort of negative price action, we in the past we've seen assets give up 80% of the gains they've made during a bull market in just a matter of weeks. And Luna looks like it could be on that trajectory. That being said, from a fundamental perspective, I'm still very bullish on the project. And if I had a chance to accumulate at lower levels when it looks like, you know, the macro backdrop's changing a little bit, it looks like Luna's ready to bounce, we got a bullish engulfing candle, stochastics are crossing over, then I'd be looking to enter for sure because, like you said, I do still think this thing could make new all-time highs, but just not trying to catch a falling knife here as, you know, news on top of sell pressure on top of a bearish macro backdrop kind of drives this thing down right now.
And I think that applies to Bitcoin as well. I'm not necessarily bearish just because we've had such a like profound downtrend, but like I just don't think there's a necessary reason to knife catch. I do like Luna below the $50 level for like a long term, maybe like 4-year play. You know, it's probably going to be a dominant value play in the next bull market cycle. But you know that remains to be seen. Something that I want to show in terms of like in crypto and in just markets in general, like you don't really have to catch a falling knife, even if this is a nice macro accumulation level. Like in virtually all, or if not 90% of these crypto bottoms, you see that initial capitulation. You see a retest of supply or of support, whatever you want to call it. And then, you know, once you get those lower highs forming and a little bit of a rounding pattern, then you can have confidence to be like, all right, I don't need to catch a falling knife. I can just buy into momentum and ride this uptrend. You saw a very similar thing with Ethereum that I want to show. Like even with ETH, you know, you had such an aspect of capitulation. Then you had the auto rally into the local level of resistance. And then you create the range. But overall, like even if you didn't buy here, you still had many opportunities in which price retested the bottom of the range. And with Bitcoin, I'm kind of inclined to agree that we're probably going to see another retest of the bottom of that range. And if you even extend it out further with Ethereum here, I mean that kind of extrapolates to a price of roughly 1900 if we are to see something like this. But my overall point with Luna is that you don't have to catch the falling knife. You know, there's probably going to be, a longer sustained bottom that needs to form before price can really trend up with any substantial bullish momentum. So a little bit of a few tangents there, get lost in the charts, but overall, that's kind of the general premise.
Yeah, no, it's important stuff, CJ. V-shaped recoveries are very uncommon in this space. And it's hard because in crypto, there's such like a feeling of FOMO when it moves to the upside and you see those auto rallies, people automatically want to buy back in. But yeah, I encourage you to be patient, not buy the first bounces because people will continue to take profits on those bounces. And I think we will have chance to, buy these assets when it's not, in the midst of such heavy sell pressure. We'll have more opportunities. So just be patient. But yeah, I think that's all we got for today. So as always, join us for the members only Doge of the Day straight after this, where we do a bit more of a deep dive, go over some trade insights. But if you guys would like to join us in the crypto community, we share our insights in there as well. Also have a community of traders from all around the world with 24/7 chat, pro charting service, extensive education, curriculum, and a whole lot more. Definitely head over there and check that out if you guys are interested in learning more. And on the way out, please like and subscribe. Definitely really helps the channel. That's all we got for today. Any parting words for our audience, CJ?
Just be safe out there. Tough to trade sometimes in a ranging market like this, but we'll see you guys in the community room. All the best.